All righty. Welcome back, everyone, to another great episode of The Human Role. So today we are going to dive into culture first hiring. We're going to get into broadening talent and definitely building belonging. So I have another amazing guest. We have John Ferguson. He is a champion of inclusion, people strategies. He's a culture transformation specialist and a board member of the SHRM Foundation. So really excited to have John here today. He's a perfect person and colleague to have when we're talking about culture first, just given his experience. So John, thank you so much for being here today. Really excited to have you and allow you to share your insight to my network. But before we get started, I wanted to allow you the floor for anyone who is new to your platform so that you can give them some details on your background and what kind of led you here today on your journey.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here with you today, Tiana. And I just look forward to this. I think how deep and how wide we'll probably go in our conversation. We had an intro call and we were both lighting up like fireflies over here just through the synergies that we have. So I know that will pull through in today's recording. So who is John Ferguson? So born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina, to a family of entrepreneurs. My dad was a military vet. So it really was a foundation for sort of always being curious and never limiting yourself. So that was sort of what rooted me, along with growing up in the church. So I graduated from college with a political science degree from Furman University, which is in my hometown. And then I said, you know what, this makes sense. Let's go to the nation's capital. So I went to Washington, D.C. and started my career in HR. And I would almost say by happenstance, I was fully dedicated to finding a job on Capitol Hill. However, when I graduated, they really wanted me to do an unpaid internship again. And I said, you know what? I can't do it. So long story short, I found my way into HR working for Hyatt Hotels. And that really was brought to my attention when I started thinking about transferable skills that I had. Growing up, I was always involved in sort of student council, student government. So I thought about, okay, how does that same type of skill set translate into the real world beyond doing politics? And so HR got on my radar. So Hyatt Hotels in Washington, D.C. was where I cut my teeth in HR, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity. I was there for a couple of years, and then I transitioned to the world of sports and entertainment, which was also just happenstance. I was looking for an HR job. Like, hey, who's looking for an HR manager? I think when you having worked in sports now for close to 15 years, you recognize a lot of people have deep passion when they work in sports, and it's sort of been that lifelong dream. For me, I just kind of happened to find a job that was an HR role that happened to be in sports. And I'll tell you, it was a phenomenal synergy. And that was really where I was able to start nurturing that sort of people first concept. Was during my time in DC with Monumental Sports and Entertainment. So I was there for a decade. That is a long time and a phenomenal body of work that I was able to produce there. And then I went and got my MBA, and then also from Howard University. And then I earned an executive certification in strategic diversity and inclusion management from Georgetown University. And that was when I realized I'm ready for the top seat. So what opportunities would be out there, and the power of LinkedIn. So if you hear anyone out here looking for roles and opportunities, LinkedIn is a very powerful tool. However, I ended up landing at NASCAR in Daytona Beach, Florida. So my family and I relocated, and it was a phenomenal run. So I just wrapped up my time there. And when I'll tell you about that was a very pivotal moment of my career, because it allowed me to come in not only as a first-time CHRO, but it also gave me this place where I could go in to lead, build, and transform. A lot of the work that we did to attract new fans, but also grow and increase our employment brand was remarkable. So the transformation at NASCAR is one that I will always be proud of. And then now I get the opportunity to speak with you today and tell you some of the exciting things we're doing with the SHRM Foundation, and also just all things HR and what's on the horizon. So Tiana, thank you for the opportunity. I'm so excited for today's discussion.
Yeah, if anyone had any question about the resume of why he was the pick to talk about this topic, he definitely explained that appropriately. You know, I saw John speak at the Transform conference this year, and it was great. Like, he had really great insight when it came to AI. So shout out to Transform for bringing the network together, because it was a fun time, and we happened to be sitting by each other. And so I'm excited for him to kind of share just his whole experience and his thought process here. And as he mentioned, we're going to get into his SHRM Foundation. So also, John presented me with this new hub that I had no clue about from my end. So I'm really excited for him to dip into that and share, the meaning behind all that. So the SHRM Foundation Skills First Back to Work Hub is a big part of John's background as well, and something that really excites him, in this current pivotal moment in life. And so I'm really interested to hear, John, exactly what that is, but why it is a really critical tool in today's workforce.
Hey, this is William Tincup, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Practitioner Corner podcast. It's a wonderful podcast about the journey, the paths of how practitioners, both HR and TA, kind of go from high school, college, all the way to where they are right now, some of the things that they've learned, how they've been successful, people that thrive around them, etc. It's a fun podcast. You'll love it. You'll learn from it. Subscribe to it. Thanks.
So the Skills First Hub is really where we say, what can you as an individual do to help move this business or this organization forward? Because I'm sure you can relate to this, but when I graduated from college, every job description had 4-year degree required or preferred. And so it's really allowing us to see people for the skills that they possess and that they bring separate from the credentials. Because I just told you, I came from an entrepreneurial family. I was first generation college. So imagine how many opportunities that my parents may have wanted to pursue, but were unable to because there was a degree requirement. And so when I think about the SHRM Foundation Skills First initiative, it really promotes hiring and talent development based on skills and competencies that extend beyond just your degrees or traditional credentials. So it's really exciting. And I think some employers are unsure how to go about that because we've always kind of had this check the box thing. And so I'd say when you go to the Skills Force Hub, you're going to see resources, trainings, you're going to see checklists. And I know many of us, sometimes depending on where you work, I know at least when I started my career at Hyatt Hotels, it was a small HR team because we were at a 500-person unionized property. And so when you think about a small HR team, you're like, well, I don't have the bandwidth to possibly roll out or even think about how would I adjust my talent acquisition strategy to incorporate some of this Skills First initiative. But I'll tell you, when you go to the Skills First Hub, they give you easy wins, low hanging fruit for a team of 1 or a team of 50 or a team of 100. And so it really just breaks down those barriers so that untapped talent pools can get back to work. And when I think about untapped talent pools, let's run through that. So we're talking about veterans. We're talking about justice involved individuals, people with disabilities, or workers simply without degrees. And so this allows us to support those people getting them back to work. There was a stat that I saw earlier, and unfortunately, I'm going to try to paraphrase my way through it, but I think there's over 70 million Americans are skilled through experience, but lack a 4-year degree. Right now, Tiana, I'm not sure if you're hearing it, but I start to hear sometimes that we're having a skills shortage in some areas. And then sometimes I hear that people are unable to hire people. But we also know there's barriers that have been in place that can prevent some people from entering the workforce. So skills first approach, when you boil it down, it diversifies the talent pipelines and closes the opportunity gap. And it also aligns with inclusive hiring practices because we want to make sure that we give everyone an opportunity to come and do their best and to provide for their family. So, Tiana, that's the tip of the iceberg on Skills First. But I encourage everyone to please visit the SHRM Foundation Skills First Hub for the free resources. They also have a credential that you can sign up to receive as well as an HR professional.
Nice. Okay, look, I mean, a lot to unpack there, but first, the Skills First Hub, we will absolutely have this on the screen and also attached in the post as well. So be sure to click on it, review it. If you have any questions, you can absolutely reach out to John for those questions. But I think one thing you mentioned that was really key to me is like the easy wins, right? So like when you're in it from an HR seat and you're so swamped, sometimes you don't realize that like something very small can go a long way. And so just having someone point out what those easy wins are, a lot of times when people think of making a change, they think of having to dip into budgets and bring on a new system or new platform. Sometimes it's just a simple shift, internally that costs nothing or costs very minimal. So I think that was really important to highlight where there could be some easy wins that could help your population and feed back into your culture. So absolutely love that. And we know between the hiring space and the talent space, there are certain barriers, right? Which is why D&I and B are so important. So I think that is great to highlight. And so I'm really wanting to re-encourage everyone to absolutely go and look at that hub and reach out if you have any questions, because it's I've looked through it and it's very insightful. And then, of course, if you can get a certification, that's a cherry on top. So all good stuff there. All right, so let's get in to your view on what it really means as we talk about hiring and talent, what it really means to hire the right candidate today, right? We're talking about different generations in the workforce. Things are ever evolving and changing and shifting every day, from culture to skills and to really expectations from when I think we were starting off into the workforce until now. So I really would love to hear your insight on, what that really means in order to get the right candidate for a role.
Yes. Early in my career, I was taught a phrase, and it has always stayed with me when you think about recruiting and identifying talent. And it was very simple: hire the talent, or hire the attitude, train the skill. Hire the attitude, train the skill. And I think that has been something that has always allowed me to see the person for their full experience, but also just recognize, when you get to where I am in my career, you recognize some people just don't have the proper attitude to navigate the landscape, to do the role. And that's something that is hard to teach someone. You had lots of inputs that have created and helped you become the person that you are. So I want to, I believe in hiring the attitude, and we can train the skill. But that also believes that I have this belief that we can do a lot of things as humans and as individuals. So when we think about inclusive hiring practices or identifying the right talent, there are some roles that are going to require specific skills. But I think attitude, because I really want to spend time today, Tiana, talking to Gen Z, because I think they are getting some interesting headlines in the marketplace right now. Some companies are running away from them because they're like, hey, we can come in, we can do the work, but you need to tell us exactly what we need to do. And so with that, there's a level of patience that we need to have. But I think they all have some pretty robust attitudes. They've just gotten accustomed to being able to ask someone for the question and getting an answer all the time. And so I teach and coach them like, hey, you have to be resourceful. You have to be able to use the resources available to you. It's okay to ask questions, but there are certain things when you start working full time that an employer is going to expect for you to understand and be able to deliver on, I would say, out of the gate.
Yeah, there's almost a different feel too, right? The technology has expanded so much that there's a layer of roles where we would get our initial experience from back in the day versus now, we've got AI stepping in too. So I think there's a different layer of how you have to treat the different generations and what their expectations are. And I think just having that conversation and being transparent really goes a long way, which is an amazing segue into the next thing I wanted to pick your brain about. So since we are in very uncertain and unprecedented times, I guess you can say some years past COVID, we're seeing ourselves back into that state. So in your experience, what would you say are, some practical ways that HR leaders can really foster trust and culture, especially as we talk about the different generations? Kind of curious on what your thoughts are there.
The first thing I'm going to say is lower the waterline. It is something that I've said a few times, but lower the waterline. And what I mean by that is just think about that iconic iceberg image. Above the waterline is the highlight reel. It's all the things that went well. But when we get below that waterline, we start to see what people have tried. They failed forward, or they just, made a bad decision at some point. But I think that's where the real lessons are. And when we lower that waterline in a one-to-one setting or in a group setting, we start to recognize how much more we have in common than we don't. And so I always strive for people to be open and transparent as much as they're comfortable with. But as a leader, I try to lead with transparency and vulnerability. Because 9 times out of 10, Tiana, if you go to someone and you tell them a secret, or if they tell you a secret, you're like, wow, I didn't know we were that level of friendship. I feel like there's trust here. You will 9 times out of 10 in return share something that maybe you would not have shared because you've created a safe space for people in each other to be vulnerable. So when I think about HR leaders, it's the art of lowering the waterline and making sure we teach our people leaders, what does that look like? Because it's not a one size fits all approach. We're going to have to meet people where they are. But 9 times out of 10, if you're trying to establish a relationship and you kind of lead with this vulnerable state, people will lean back in with you. So I encourage people to lower that waterline, be vulnerable, be transparent, but also listen. There's a lot that we can learn when we just take time to really listen to what is impacting someone. There's a story that I'll share quickly. There was a teammate of mine who was very much an introvert, but I'm the HR leader. I like to do the rounds. I'm checking in on folks, just, casually stopping by, walking through the office. And I came upon this colleague's desk, and it was a group setting. So it wasn't the time or place to sort of probe, but I noticed something was off, Tiana. And I was like, something's going on with him today. I'm not sure what it is. So I went upstairs and it just sat with me. And so I went to lunch and I saw him outside, and it was just 2 of us. I was like, hey, I just want to check in with you. And he's like, everything's fine. I was like, well, just this morning, something was shifted. I don't know what it is, but I just want to let you know that, I noticed and I'm here for you if you need anything or if there's anything I help you with. And he just said, I didn't think it was visible, but I'm just extremely homesick. And this was an employee who had recently relocated to join the team. And we were able to establish a level of community there, because I recall being homesick at times. And so we ended up chatting later that afternoon for like an hour just about life, Nothing about work, just about life. Him reminiscing on home, what his journey's been like. But it's those moments where we get to see people for people that I think that matter most. And so he felt seen, heard, and valued. And I felt that I was able to just give him space and time to be, or which I think helped him as he was continuing his journey in this new environment and with this new organization.
Absolutely. Talk about being a heavy leader there, right? Like that authenticity goes a long way. And I just spoke with a leadership colleague too, who also mentioned in his company that their CEO sends out emails every week and people can respond to him and he actually responds back. So that creates some type of trust within the organization, which is exactly what you did. You essentially touched, that employee and made them feel comfortable and probably helped eliminate a lot of their homesickness, right? I'm sure that comes across very relatable. And a lot of times that is what's missing depending on your organization and what employees really want. But it's a little bit awkward to go to C-suite executive. Most employees would be hesitant with that and just say, what's on their mind. So it's good that you were able to have that sense and reach out to him and were even comfortable in your own skin to just approach him and have that conversation and then also be vulnerable on your own. So that all goes a very long way. So kudos to you. So we're in the midst of AI. How do you see these digital platforms and the employee experience tools that are kind of being created now? All this tech transformation when it comes to wellness, how do you all see that playing a factor, but also affecting the people and culture function?
There's pros and cons to everything, but I do believe that the tools of technology will help us to continue to move forward and evolve as we think about how people prefer to interact and be communicated with. So, my two daughters, we went to my mom's house once a while back, and they're like, why does Grandma Chris have 26 of the same books? And I'm like, she doesn't. They're like, well, what are these books? I'm like, those are encyclopedias, baby. They're like, oh, what is that? You really had to look through this book? And so, yes, but their generation is like, why would I need an encyclopedia? It's foreign to them. So when I think about the evolution of, AI and just how we leverage TikTok to search and problem solve, or Google, or these wellness tools or scheduling tools, I think it removes barriers, but I think it also will continue to open up the talent pipeline. Let me give you the other side of that. There's the older generation who's not as accustomed or as comfortable with these tools. Yep. My mom is a baby boomer, so she's kind of like, hey, I need you to help me with this. Happy to help. So I think there is somewhere in the middle that we have to each generation teach the next. But I think these tools remove barriers to opportunity, very much so like the Skills First initiative with the SHRM Foundation, simply because everybody has one of these.
Yeah.
And there's so much access that you can get. So let's think back, Tiana, to when I was in middle school, high school, somewhere along those lines, AOL.
Yeah.
I didn't have a computer at home. Yeah. So in order for me to I had to go to the library. Yeah. But now everybody's walking around with that same computer probably on their iPhone when you think about processing speeds and things of that nature. So I'm very excited for the evolution of technology for mental health, for well-being, even when you think about the practical things that we have to do in the workplace. So, I think about frontline staff and, that typically is going to have a high turnover rate. But I recall back to when I waited tables right out of college, the things that made that easy was the flexibility that it provided. So some of that technology is allowing people to set their schedule, change and exchange, or submit that they can no longer work a shift all within their mobile device. So the speed of communication and the speed of technology is allowing us to go faster and further. But one thing I always like to remember is that AI, in my opinion, is not going to ever replace the human element to what we do. And I think, SHRM has a formula that they've said for a couple of years now, AI plus HI equals the real return on the investment. And I believe that's it. It's going to take all of us to move forward. And so I'm a big proponent of AI. I use it. I encourage, if you're not familiar with it, just start playing with it. I like to say it's a great tool to eliminate the blank sheet of paper. I don't know how many times you need to send that very complex email, or maybe you need to prepare a presentation. You're like, I'm not sure where to start. I think that AI and some of those resources are great tools to help you get a foundation. Now, you should never just 100% use the tool and without fact checking. You need to always trust but verify. But there's a lot of speed that is coming with the use of technology. And I'll tell you one sort of lookout that I have, though, is as companies are trying to figure out where does this fit into our current way in which we do business. I think that's where we are. We're at this kind of intersection of like, we've had a digital transformation, but now there's this AI transformation. And some people are saying, well, hey, if AI can do these elements, then I don't need these functions anymore. And I think as we think about AI, as we think about cloud computing and things of that nature, it will create new jobs, but there will be some jobs that will go away. And so I encourage everyone to be on the front edge of understanding what that skill set is, what it will require of you, or even how is your company looking to incorporate those tools into your daily routine. What do you think about that?
Yes. So you took the trust but verify, the using it, but being careful with using it. I think just becoming more strategic, right? Because, inevitably that there are going to be some jobs eliminated. But what I've been encouraging, my people to do is just, you don't want to be unfamiliar with it. You don't want to block it out so much that you're so angry by it that you're, a couple of years now, you're so far behind. You want to make sure that you are knowledgeable about it and can speak to it and try to figure out a way on how you can even maybe help code it or help build it for, clients in the HR space, help build these bots. Because to your point, the human aspect, we are going to be the ones that need to provide the answers to these chat bots to spit out properly. So is it really taking away job? It's just, no, it's helping eliminate so many people coming to your door, but you're still managing that back end piece. And it's so funny. A couple of weeks ago, I was listening into a webinar. So Jason Averbook, who works for Mercer, he travels all around and does a lot of speaking engagements. He had mentioned, I think he even put up a post of like, why are we calling AI cheating? Like, it's essentially just combining everything that we would Google. So instead of going through like 60,000 pages, it's literally just summing it up all in one. And that just really clicked to me. That was the first time I had heard someone say that. And I was like, oh my goodness, like it really so people are making a big deal about it, but essentially we've had it in Google. We just had to go through all these different articles and now it's summing things together. So I think that was an even more eye opener to me that like, it is okay to accept it. And I think between businesses and schools and stuff, we've got to figure out a way to somehow build it in versus pushing it out or pointing the finger or calling someone names, because they're using it.
It's going to transform how we live, work, and play, and even learn. My wife is a professor at Howard University. And so she's grappling with like, okay, how do I ensure that the students are learning properly? Because the way when she came through her undergraduate experience, AI wasn't a thing. And so she's like, I don't want to shun the tool, but I also want to make sure that they are continuing to learn. And so it just requires all of us to adjust how we're doing things. And I think there's something beautiful in that because sometimes we catch ourselves being on autopilot. And so when you have these new technologies, new advances, it makes you pause and think like, wait, how does this impact how I've been on autopilot for the past, 10 years in my curriculum or my syllabus hasn't changed. Now I need to adjust it because technology has now surpassed where I was. And so I need to make sure that the students are still able to learn and truly be able to be critical thinkers in the workplace.
Yes, absolutely. And that kind of already dips into the looking ahead question I kind of had for you on like what shifts we think we're going to be seeing from like the hiring, support, and growing people over the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, obviously, I think we need to figure out how to build AI into specific platforms. Even for us, like shifting our mindset, I think it's going to be a lot harder than the younger generation's mindset. I mean, I think we've gotten so used to what it looks like or had looked like for us. And so sometimes, I guess, even for me, I'm going to speak for myself. It's like, oh, I wish I had this. And then you kind of get a little salty because like, they had it and we didn't have it. But again, that's a personal thing. That's a feeling, not a fact. So I know that that's going to add to it. Anything else outside of like, the transformation of AI and these system tools that you think is going to shift like the hiring and culture process over the next some odd years?
I really think we have to think about retention differently. I think that's going to impact how companies are forecasting and planning for human capital needs. And that really just when I look at the generational mix in the workplace, you have baby boomers and Gen X. They were more inclined to stay 10 years plus. Millennials, a little less than that, maybe 5. But then you have Gen Z coming in 2 to 3 years, maybe. They have the luxury of saying, I can still go back home if I need to. Like I'm not codependent on this job that I will sidestep certain things that are important to me so that I can stay here. And so I really think we have to think about retention differently. And so I believe in let's making sure that all employers are building quality candidates for the labor market and understanding that even though someone may not be there for 5 or 10 years, that doesn't make them a bad employee or that doesn't make them someone that's not loyal. It makes them someone that's of the new generation, and they are curious about other opportunities and ways in which they can grow their career. We've also seen enough data that says, sometimes you stay in a role or company for 10 plus years, you end up leaving money on the table. And I'll tell you a good example I have heard that when I was thinking through this thought process was my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law is retired lieutenant colonel in the Army. So she was like, John, in the military, every 3 to 4 years, you change jobs, you relocate, you move. So it's like, so you come in first year, you learn a job. The second year, you're doing the job. And that third year, you're leading in the job. But by the time you're leading, they're getting you ready for the next assignment. And so it's always interesting how the military has this very structured and very clear path for growth and progression, but corporate doesn't always approach it that way. You'll get some companies that have very clear paths and lanes of how you can expand and grow your career. But then you have some that don't. And so when I think about Gen Z and their desire to not stay for 15 years, I think it's exciting. And so I encourage employers to think about building quality labor for the labor market, but coming to terms with saying, hey, you may not be here for a long time, but let's make it a good time. And because then you become a great place to work and a great place to be from. If you're cycling people through at that sort of cadence, and we're not there yet, but in the future, I think we will be. That now adds and helps build your employment brand, because those employers are going to say, hey, when I worked at XYZ company, they were phenomenal. They gave me these skills, this skill, and this experience. But guess what? I was then able after 3 years or 4 years to use that as a springboard to this next role that I'm really excited about. And so that's the sort of excitement that I think we need to bring to think as we think about retention, and also reducing some of the bias that we're probably seeing bubble up about Gen Z. Because guess what? Every generation in the workforce was at one point the emerging generation. And so we all, I think the same topics and stereotypes existed. They just kind of get shaped a little bit differently. So when I think about what's the future, those are things that stand out. And then, of course, we just have AI in the mix of all of that, too. So it's an exciting time, to say the least.
Yeah, I think if you shift your mindset of like not looking at it as a negative and just building you for a better future, I think that's only going to enhance your experience, right? And what you can speak to. And so all the things that also tie back into culture. But last thing I wanted to pick your brain about, also tying into culture, a culture trend right now that you're currently watching. So I think we've dipped into the Skills First Hub. Of course, we dipped into AI stuff. So I want to also reiterate that too before we close out. But anything additional that you kind of have your eyes on?
I'll say a culture trend that I am paying attention to, and I don't even know if you would consider it a culture trend, but I identify as a millennial. I am a millennial. I really like the resource that TikTok is becoming. I don't know if that's a culture trend, but I think it plays into how culture shows up. I talk to a lot of young people and older people and say, there's such a wealth of information that you can find on TikTok. I think some people think it's just simply some app where people go to do the coolest dance moves. But for me, Tiana, that's where I go to meal prep. That is where I go to fix something at my house. That is where I go to prep for an interview or to do a bit of a deep dive into a topic that I may not be familiar with. But also I think about what it has exposed me to. There's certain things that they were not in my orbit. And so I get on TikTok, I was like, you know what? I never knew that this was how some other people live, or this is what they do. And so I think if you're a people leader, it is a great way to have some casual scrolling time, but to also see what other generations and other different types of folks are thinking, experiencing, or desiring to have in their daily routine. So if I was leading, a team of Gen Z, I would get on TikTok to understand, okay, how do they like to be led? What are they saying? There's a new thing that's out there now. They call it the Gen Z stare. They just kind of have this longer pause when they look at people. And I had never heard of that. And so now one of my family members is a generation. I asked him, he's like, oh yeah, we totally have the Gen Z stare. Like we just kind of stare off at you. And I was like, I never knew that. So I learned something new. And it helps me understand, okay, how do I best interact with these individuals in the workforce?
So I did get on TikTok over the last year or so. And to your point, like a colleague sent me a TikTok video and it was like how you make chandeliers and the people who make chandeliers. And I'm like, I would not have thought of that. So then I was like, for 2 to 3 minutes looking at how they create the chandelier space. So to your point, it does open up a different conversation on things that you may have never even thought of or even been interested in, but it is actually interesting to see how that's done. So yeah, lots of people go to TikTok for everything. So I do agree with that is look, if you're struggling to fit in with a new generation that you're hiring, use the resources. Use that as like an icebreaker to talk to them with. So all good things. All right, John, I've taken enough of your time. I really appreciate you being on today. This is such a great conversation, you guys. Reach out to John. He will be attached to this post. Ask him questions. Click the link to the Skills First Hub for SHRM. Lots of good insight there. And if you have any questions about it, definitely send him a note. But John, this is great. Love to kind of maybe pick your brain in another couple of months. Maybe we do another in-depth episode. But thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for having me.
All righty, you guys. And I will see you in another few weeks for another great episode. Bye.